Trevor drove the silver cake knife directly into the center of the white fondant. As he pulled the blade back, bright pink filling spilled out onto the crystal cake stand. 70 guests gathered in the main dining room of the country club immediately erupted into cheers, clapping and raising their champagne glasses to celebrate our second child. Except Patricia. My mother-in-law pushed her heavy wooden chair back so hard it screeched violently against the polished hardwood floor. The room went dead silent. The cheering stopped instantly. She stood up, her face pale with fury, and pointed a manicured finger right at the crumbling pink cake. "This is a defective investment," she announced. Her voice was sharp and loud, echoing off the vaulted ceilings for everyone to hear. She grabbed her designer purse from the table, glared dead at my husband, and narrowed her eyes. "Call me when you finally have a real child." She turned on her heel and walked out the heavy oak double doors, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. 70 people stared at us, their mouths hanging open in pure shock. I swallowed the thick lump forming in my throat. I squeezed the edge of the linen tablecloth until my knuckles turned white. The silence hummed in my ears, heavy and suffocating. Patricia wanted a reaction. She wanted tears, Bething, and public humiliation. She got nothing. Staring at the empty doorway, my chest tightened into a hard, cold knot. The war had just begun. 3 days later, she escalated the hostility. Patricia let herself into our home using the spare key she was never supposed to possess. I was standing in the kitchen, exhausted to my bones, holding my newborn daughter, Alexis, against my shoulder. Patricia marched into the room, her presence instantly turning the air cold, and slid a thick, stapled document across the granite counter. It was a formal, legally drafted agreement, a commitment for me to undergo gender selection in vitro fertilization within the next 2 years. I stared at the dense legal paper, then up at her perfectly powdered face, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of her demand. She crossed her arms and told me that if Trevor and I did not sign the contract within 48 hours, she would permanently freeze our access to the $1.2 million family trust. That trust was Trevor's rightful inheritance, established by his grandparents. And it was the money we relied on to pay our mortgage. But Patricia controlled it as the primary trustee. While I stood there, reeling from her financial blackmail, I heard a small rustle in the hallway. Our 3-year-old daughter, Morgan, was standing quietly by the base of the stairs, clutching her stuffed bear. Patricia walked over to her, crouching down to eye level. "Your mommy is ruining our family legacy," Patricia whispered to my toddler. The cold knot in my chest snapped. The protective instincts of a mother overrode every ounce of societal politeness I had left. I marched over, grabbed Patricia firmly by the elbow of her cashmere sweater, and physically pulled her away from my child. I ushered her straight out the front door and slammed it so hard the glass panes rattled in their wooden frames. Trevor stood in the living room, completely paralyzed, caught in the devastating crossfire between the quiet rage on my face and his mother's financial guillotine. In Patricia's mind, children were not human beings. They were simply assets on a balance sheet. They were investments meant to secure a family name and boost her social standing among her wealthy peers. If you were born a girl, you were a liability. I realized in that exact moment that she would never love my daughters. She would only weigh them. I refused to panic. Trevor was terrified we were going to lose the house, pacing the floor and running his hands through his hair. But my mind shifted into the cold, calculating space I used every day at work. I managed loss prevention and auditing for a massive regional retail chain. I spent my days tracking missing inventory and uncovering corporate fraud. I knew from years of experience that people who use money as a weapon are almost always hiding a massive secret in their own ledger. Patricia's threat relied entirely on financial leverage and intimidation. But she made one critical, arrogant mistake. Because Trevor was a legally named beneficiary of the trust, he possessed a federal right to review his own tax documents. I sat Trevor down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and instructed him to log into his father's automated accounting firm portal. Douglas, my father-in-law, was a passive, quiet enabler who let his wife run the family. But he kept meticulous professional records. Trevor initiated a standard password reset on his beneficiary account. Within 5 minutes, we bypassed Patricia completely and gained full authorized access to the Internal Revenue Service transcripts. We pulled the Schedule Kone forms for the family trust over the last 5 years. One glance at the screen confirmed my darkest suspicion. The trust's reported interest and dividend income had plummeted to absolute zero 3 years ago. The account was empty. The $1.2 million was completely gone. The money she was holding over our heads, the wealth she used to threaten and control us, did not even exist. I printed the heavy stack of forms, drove straight to Douglas's downtown accounting office, and dropped the papers directly onto his mahogany desk. Douglas immediately tried to deploy his usual enabling tactics, holding his hands up and claiming Patricia just wanted the best for the family legacy, that she was just passionate about tradition. I cut him off. I forced him to look at the highlighted numbers on the page. I pointed out that Patricia did not just secretly drain the trust to fund her lavish Charlotte socialite lifestyle. She had taken out massive, hidden loans against his personal retirement accounts to cover up the missing money and keep the illusion alive. Douglas's face went ghost white. The color completely drained from his cheeks. 35 years of enabling his wife's toxic illusion came crashing down on his own financial survival in a matter of seconds. Sensing that Douglas was suddenly asking dangerous questions at home, and knowing the missing money was about to be officially audited, Patricia launched a desperate, calculated counterattack. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived at our house via certified mail. Inside was a formal letter, printed on heavy hospital letterhead. Patricia claimed she had just been diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. The letter demanded that Trevor bring the girls to her sprawling estate immediately for final goodbyes, explicitly stating that I was banned from the property. Trevor collapsed onto the living room sofa, burying his face in his hands, completely paralyzed by the sudden, overwhelming grief of losing his mother. But I felt nothing but ice in my veins. They broke me with emotional manipulation in the past. But today, I was the one holding the hammer. I took the letter from his shaking hands. I did not waste time calling the hospital, knowing I would just hit a solid wall of medical privacy laws. I looked at the physical document itself. I pulled out my laptop and searched the national provider identifier number listed directly under the doctor's signature. The top oncologist she claimed was treating her terminal illness was actually a retired pediatrician operating out of a small clinic in Ohio. I scrutinized the hospital logo printed at the top of the page. The watermark was slightly pixelated, pulled directly from a public annual report published 10 years ago. The cancer was a strategic, disgusting lie. In her twisted mind, a terminal diagnosis achieved two brilliant goals. It would legally delay any court-ordered audit of the trust due to severe medical hardship. And it would socially trap Douglas. A husband who files for divorce against a dying woman would be permanently ostracized by their country club friends. It was a desperate maneuver to hide her embezzlement and keep her husband firmly under her control. I packed the forged medical letter, the pediatrician's real registry page, and the zeroed out tax transcripts into 3 sleek black leather portfolios. I drove straight to the Charlotte Country Club. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Patricia was hosting a lavish charity luncheon in the main dining room, dabbing her eyes with a silk napkin, playing the tragic, dying grandmother for an audience of wealthy, sympathetic friends. I walked right past the host stand. The air in the room was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and roasted salmon. I did not yell. I did not cause a scene or grab a microphone. I simply walked up to Patricia's table and handed the closed portfolios to the 3 biggest, most vicious gossips in the entire club. Patricia stopped speaking mid-sentence. She watched in absolute horror as the women opened the folders. Inside each one was the undeniable proof of her entire fabricated existence. The forged cancer letter sat right next to the pediatrician's credentials. The tax statements showing she had stolen her own son's inheritance were highlighted in bright yellow. Patricia's jaw dropped. Sweat beaded heavily on her forehead. She began to hyperventilate, her perfectly manicured hands shaking violently as the socialites physically recoiled in disgust, whispering frantically to one another. At that exact moment, Trevor walked into the dining room, his face set in stone. Patricia scrambled out of her chair, reaching for him, begging her son to tell them it was a terrible misunderstanding. Trevor did not comfort her. He handed her a thick legal petition. We were filing an emergency order to have her declared mentally and legally unfit to serve as trustee. Using her own fake medical documents as the core evidence of her instability. Then, Douglas stepped out from the hallway, standing right behind Trevor. The entire dining room went dead silent, watching this family empire collapse in real time. Douglas looked at his wife of 35 years, his expression completely hollow, and calmly announced he was filing for divorce to save himself from federal prison. Patricia's power evaporated instantly. She stood there, completely alone in a room full of people, suffocating under the crushing weight of her own paper trail. A few months passed, and the dust finally settled on the wreckage she left behind. Douglas received a definitive, clean break. We helped him pack his boxes and move into a modest 1-bedroom apartment in downtown Charlotte. He explicitly severed Patricia's access to his remaining pension, hired a ruthless forensic accountant, and began building a quiet life free from her overbearing shadow. Patricia's massive, sprawling house grew eerily quiet. Her social circle completely exiled her, treating her like a pariah. She was drowning in legal subpoenas from the divorce proceedings and facing massive civil penalties for the drained trust. The total isolation she had threatened me with at the baby shower had become her own permanent reality. Meanwhile, our house was filled with warmth and noise. Douglas showed up at our front door for Sunday dinner every single week, proving he had survived the fallout by finally choosing his real family over Patricia's toxic illusion. That evening, Trevor and I sat on the couch, watching Morgan carefully hold newborn Alexis in her lap, showing her a picture book. There was no massive trust fund waiting for them, but there were no toxic expectations either. We were paying our mortgage ourselves, dollar by dollar, and I had never felt richer in my entire life. I pulled out my phone, scrolled down to Patricia's contact name, and hit delete, erasing her from our lives forever. Total. Quiet peace. Looking back at everything we survived, I realize now that people like Patricia are trapped in their own elaborate delusions. They operate on a narcissistic ledger. In their minds, love is not a genuine emotion, it is a calculated transaction. Every relationship is a business deal, and every family member is an asset to be managed, controlled, and leveraged. When Patricia looked at my young daughters, she did not see innocent children who needed love, protection, and guidance. She saw severe liabilities. She saw a failure to produce the male heir she believed would elevate her status and secure her imaginary royal bloodline. She built an entire identity around a legacy that did not exist. A fantasy that required everyone else to sacrifice their happiness and autonomy to maintain her grand illusion. But the ultimate tragedy of people who treat their family like financial investments is that they always end up morally and financially bankrupt. They demand respect through fear and financial terror. And when the money inevitably runs out, so does the loyalty of everyone around them. This entire nightmare taught me things I will ensure I pass down to my daughters. I want to share 3 vital rules with you today. Rules forged in the intense fire of this conflict, in the hopes that they might save someone else from years of unnecessary misery. Rule number 1, the currency of a real family is respect, not leverage. If someone ties their love, their approval, or their physical presence to a financial condition, you are not in a family. You are in a hostage situation. Genuine love does not come with a drafted contract. It does not demand that you alter your body, abandon your choices, or mold your children to fit a psychotic standard. When people use money, inheritances, or properties to control your life, they are broadcasting their own massive insecurity. They know deeply that without the money, they have absolutely nothing else to offer as a human being. Walk away from the money. The financial struggle of building your own life from the ground up is infinitely better than the psychological destruction of living under someone else's thumb. Rule number 2, never fight toxicity with emotion. Fight it with flawless documentation. Narcissists and relentless manipulators thrive in the chaotic energy of screaming matches. They want you to cry. They want you to lose your temper. Because when you finally snap and lose your temper, they can point the finger and label you the crazy one. They use your emotional reactions to play the ultimate victim. You have to starve them of that reaction entirely. You suffocate them under the crushing weight of paper trails, receipts, and undeniable facts. When Patricia tried to destroy my family, I did not waste a single breath arguing with her twisted logic. I audited her reality. I brought the tax forms. I brought the medical registry. Cold facts do not care about a manipulator's fragile feelings. When you bring undeniable proof to the table, their power vanishes like smoke in the wind. Rule number 3, cutting off a toxic parent is not an act of revenge, it is an act of profound self-defense. There is a massive societal pressure to forgive and forget simply because you share a biological bloodline. People will tell you that family is everything, that you only get one mother, that you should swallow your pride and keep the peace. But you cannot build a sturdy bridge to someone who is actively burning down your side of the river. Protecting your children from generational trauma requires the absolute courage to amputate the poison of the previous generation. You are entirely allowed to walk away from people who hurt you repeatedly, even if they share your last name. Trust is earned through consistent, respectful behavior over time, not owed simply through a birth certificate. The judge eventually ordered the remainder of the estate to be liquidated to cover the missing funds. And Patricia was forced to downsize into a cramped condo on the outskirts of the city. The community at the country club officially revoked her membership. And her name became a whispered cautionary tale among the very people she once tried so desperately to impress. She lost her reputation, her loyal husband, and her entire family. All because she could not see the value of the human beings standing right in front of her. About 6 months after the messy divorce was officially finalized, Trevor received a long, rambling voicemail. It was Patricia. Her voice was shaky, attempting to guilt trip him one last time. saying she was still his mother and she only did what she did to protect the family legacy. Trevor listened to the first 20 seconds, his face completely calm and unbothered. He did not get angry. He did not yell at the phone or draft a furious text message. He simply pressed delete and went right back to helping Morgan piece together a wooden puzzle on the living room rug. That was the exact moment I knew we were truly free. Indifference is the ultimate victory. Today, our daily life is remarkably peaceful. We have cultivated a chosen family of close friends and wonderful neighbors who celebrate my daughters for exactly who they are. Our home is filled with loud laughter, messy art projects, and unconditional support, not cold ultimatums. Trevor is a present, loving father who successfully broke the generational cycle of enabling abuse. Douglas is finally learning who he is outside of a severely toxic marriage, discovering hobbies and friendships he never knew he wanted. We lost $1 million on paper, but we gained our souls in the process. So I want to ask you a serious question as you listen to this. Look closely at your own life, your own family dynamics, and your own relationships. What toxic inheritance, what imaginary legacy, or what broken relationship are you desperately clinging to that is secretly costing you your peace of mind? Are you sacrificing your mental health, your dignity, or your children's safety just to keep the peace with someone who does not respect you as an adult? Are you willing to walk away from the money, the elevated status, or the conditional approval to save your own mind? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because I can promise you this one universal truth. True wealth is not found in a padded trust fund or a prestigious country club membership. True wealth is putting your head on the pillow at night, knowing your family is completely safe, and sleeping through the entire night without a sick, anxious feeling in your stomach. I am Brooke, and my family is finally free. I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. You are looking at Trevor, and maybe even Douglas, and yelling, "How could you let this woman treat your family like a personal bank account and a breeding experiment for 35 years? Why didn't you cut her off the very second she walked out of that baby shower over a pink cake?" It is so easy to judge their hesitation from the outside. But people trapped in toxic family dynamics for decades are not stupid. They are stuck in what psychologists call the slot machine effect, which is driven by intermittent reinforcement. Patricia did not just offer pure, unfiltered cruelty every single day. She offered the grand illusion of a massive trust fund, country club prestige, and tiny, random crumbs of maternal approval. When you grow up starved for genuine affection, a single crumb feels like an absolute feast. You keep pulling the lever, putting up with the abuse, hoping that this time she will finally give you the jackpot of being a normal, loving mother. Brooke was able to break this generational cycle because she stepped in from the outside. She looked at the slot machine, realized the game was entirely rigged, and simply unplugged it. Let's talk about how Brooke actually won this war, because she executed an absolute masterclass in financial self-defense. First, she used the audit strategy. Scammers and manipulators hate the details. When Patricia threatened to freeze the mortgage money, an emotional person would have panicked, cried, or begged. Brooke did not. She followed the money. By pulling those Schedule Koné tax transcripts, she bypassed the emotional manipulation entirely and looked at the cold, hard math. She discovered the empty accounts and realized the gun Patricia was holding to their heads was completely unloaded. Second, she focused on building the case. When Patricia faked terminal cancer, Brooke did not argue with her or hit the wall of medical bureaucracy. She checked the national provider identifier numbers and the document watermarks. She stopped treating her mother-in-law like family and started treating her like a hostile corporate entity. Lastly, Brooke and Trevor executed the ultimate buyout. They realized that walking away from a $1.2 million illusion was the exact price of their permanent freedom. Sometimes, the smartest investment you can ever make is cutting your losses and walking away from toxic money. Here is the final verdict. Toxic people will always try to convince you that their conditional approval is your most valuable asset. It is a massive lie. Your most valuable asset is your peace of mind. If someone requires you to sacrifice your dignity, your children's safety, or your sanity to inherit their wealth, that is not an inheritance. That is a ransom demand. Know your worth, and do not be afraid to relentlessly audit the people who claim to love you. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic family member or their money to save yourself, I want to hear your story in the comments below. Subscribe for more street smart survival strategies, and I will see you in the next one.